We're being very selective with that champagne tonight. The words dropped into the recycled air of Atlantic Airways Flight 447, like poison in a well. Rebecca Morrison stood beside seat 1B, her practiced smile faltering as she clutched the Dom Perignon bottle she'd just used to serve 3 white passengers in first class. Her eyes had gone flat the moment she'd approached the black man in the gray hoodie. Marcus Chen-Williams looked up from his quantum encryption algorithms, his fingers pausing over the tablet screen. At 41, he'd learned to read the micro-expressions of discrimination, like a native language. The slight tightening around the eyes, the shift in vocal tone, the way "sir" could sound like an insult when delivered with the right inflection. Selective, he repeated quietly, his voice carrying the controlled calm that had served him through hostile takeover meetings and congressional testimony. That's interesting. Rebecca hesitated, champagne bottle trembling slightly in her grip. Something about this passenger unsettled her. His calm confidence, the expensive tablet displaying complex diagrams, the way he'd used her name like he expected to be remembered. But 28 years of airline service had taught her to trust her instincts about passenger demographics. Dr. Sarah Kim, the cardiovascular surgeon in seat 1A, felt her stomach clench. She'd been absently checking surgical schedules on her phone when Rebecca's tone had shifted, triggering the same alarm bells that went off in the OR when something went wrong during an operation. Her thumb hovered over her camera app. "Ma'am," Dr. Kim said quietly to Rebecca, "I'm recording this interaction for my own protection. I've seen this before." The words hit Rebecca like ice water. Recording protection. She was just following protocols, managing inventory like she'd been trained. "There's no need for that," she said, her voice tightening defensively. "Is there a problem with the champagne service?" asked Maya Patel from seat 1F, her journalist's instincts engaging like a radar system. She'd covered enough corporate scandals to recognize the moment when routine interactions became something uglier. Rebecca's grip tightened on the bottle. "It's about inventory management. We have to be careful with our premium selections." James Rothwell, the Goldman Sachs investment banker in seat 2A, shifted uncomfortably. Atlantic Airways was one of his clients, and he was watching what looked like a customer service disaster unfolding in real time. "Look, I mean, we all paid the same fare, right? Maybe just, this doesn't concern you." Rebecca snapped, her professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. Marcus set down his tablet with the deliberate care of someone who'd just made a decision that would have consequences. His mixed African-American and Chinese heritage had subjected him to a unique variety of discrimination throughout his career. Assumptions about his technical competence, his business acumen, his right to occupy spaces of power and privilege. "Ms. Morrison," he said, reading her name tag, "help me understand your inventory system. You just served Dom Perignon to Dr. Kim, the couple in 1C and 1D, and Mr. Rothwell here. But now, there's a scarcity issue." Robert Chen, the Taiwanese semiconductor executive in seat 2C, looked up from his financial reports. He'd been through this script before, in different settings, different countries, but always with the same underlying assumptions about who belonged where. "I observed the service pattern," Robert said in precise English. "The inventory concern appears targeted." Rebecca's face flushed red. "I don't have to explain airline policies to passengers. If you don't like our service, you can file a complaint." Marcus pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate and calm. The device buzzed with notifications from his daughter Emma at Stanford, probably sharing some campus news, unaware that her father was about to trigger the most expensive customer service failure in aviation history. "Actually," Marcus said, his fingers moving across the screen with the same precision he used to write code that moved billions through global markets, "that's exactly what I'm going to do." Thomas Fletcher materialized from the business class cabin with the weary authority of someone who'd spent 24 years managing airline crises. At 52, He'd handled drunk celebrities, entitled executives, and every conceivable variety of first-class drama. But as he approached seat 1B, something in the passenger's stillness made his professional instincts scream warnings. Fletcher thought about his daughter's wedding next month. 24 years of service had earned him enough seniority to bid premium routes, enough salary to help with wedding expenses, enough respect from colleagues to weather minor service issues. All of that now felt fragile as he approached what was clearly not a minor service issue. "Good evening," Dr. Chen-Williams Fletcher said, having taken 30 seconds to check the manifest and immediately recognizing the name from business magazines. "I understand there's some confusion about our beverage service." Marcus looked up from his phone, where he'd been coordinating what would become the most sophisticated corporate warfare campaign in business history. "No confusion, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Morrison explained your policy quite clearly." Fletcher's internal alarm system, calibrated by decades of customer service disasters, began sounding warning bells. The passenger's tone was too controlled, too measured. Fletcher's wife, Sarah, had warned him about this exact scenario. "You can't just manage problems away, Tom. Sometimes you have to take a stand." He'd always chosen management over morality. Tonight that choice was about to cost him everything. "What policy would that be?" Fletcher asked carefully. Dr. Kim had her phone recording now, the camera positioned discreetly behind her water glass. Her surgical training had taught her to document everything during crisis situations. "Mr. Fletcher, I've been recording this interaction. Your flight attendant served champagne to every white passenger in first class, then refused the same service to Dr. Chen-Williams. She specifically mentioned being selective with inventory." The words landed like a terminal diagnosis. Fletcher felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. This wasn't a customer service issue. This was a discrimination incident recorded on video involving a passenger whose technology company held patents that powered half of American industry. Jesus James Rothwell whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're Marcus Chen-Williams, from Nexus Technologies." Maya Patel's pen stopped moving. Marcus Chen-Williams wasn't just any tech executive. He was one of the most powerful privately held company CEOs in America. His quantum computing systems routed supply chains for Fortune 500 companies. His AI algorithms powered stock trading platforms that moved trillions daily. If he decided to wage corporate warfare against Atlantic Airways, he had the weapons to destroy them completely. Rebecca appeared beside Fletcher, her face still flushed with defensive anger. "I was following proper procedures," she insisted, her voice carrying the brittle authority of someone losing control of a situation. "Some passengers understand our premium service standards better than others." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Kim's phone captured the moment perfectly, a flight attendant doubling down on discrimination while her supervisor stood frozen beside her. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from David Park, saw the Twitter thread starting. "Journalists are calling. Legal team standing by. How hard do you want to hit them?" Twitter thread. Marcus glanced around the cabin, noting Dr. Kim's recording. Maya's notebook, and the uncomfortable awareness on the faces of his fellow passengers. The story was already going viral. "Some passengers," Marcus repeated slowly, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded corporate executions. Which passengers would those be? Ms. Morrison Rebecca's training took over 28 years of airline protocols flooding her mind. Never admit fault. Never acknowledge discrimination. Defer to authority when challenged. "Sir, if you continue being disruptive, I'll have to call security." The threat detonated in the cabin like a bomb. Dr. Kim's camera captured the exact moment when a customer service dispute transformed into something that would destroy careers and companies. Marcus felt his phone buzz with a message from his daughter. "Dad, seeing weird stuff on Twitter about your flight." "You okay?" His little girl was watching her father be humiliated in real time, broadcast to millions of strangers. The personal became political. The private became nuclear. Security. Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Let's definitely call security. His fingers moved across his phone screen one more time. The message to David was simple. Execute Protocol 7. Maximum damage. No limits. The Boeing 787's first-class cabin had transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with passengers serving as jury members, and Marcus Chen-Williams emerging as both plaintiff and judge. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension, as Rebecca Morrison's discrimination incident metastasized into a national scandal in real time. Dr. Sarah Kim, MD, had just posted to Twitter, flight attendant at Atlantic Airways just refused champagne to black passenger while serving identical drinks to white passengers. Seat 1B Flight 447. Recording everything. This is 2024, not 1964. Hashtag champagne, Gate 47 retweets in the first 3 minutes. 156 likes. 89 replies growing by the second. Top reply from @Civil Rights. Now, this is exactly what systemic racism looks like. Atlantic Airways needs to answer for this immediately. Thomas Fletcher watched the tweet counter climbing on Maya Patel's phone screen and felt his career evaporating in real time. 24 years of service, his daughter's wedding fund, his pension, all disappearing because he'd failed to recognize discrimination when it happened directly in front of him. Dr. Chen-Williams, Fletcher said, his voice carrying the desperation of someone trying to prevent a disaster he couldn't fully comprehend. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding. Let me make this right. But Marcus had moved beyond the point where apologies could resolve anything. His phone displayed a growing stream of encrypted messages from his executive team, legal strategies, public relations campaigns, and financial warfare plans that would transform a champagne service dispute into a corporate apocalypse. His mind drifted momentarily to his daughter Emma, probably watching this unfold from her Stanford dorm room. What would she think of her father's response? Would she understand why some battles choose you, even when you'd rather avoid them? Dr. Kim had abandoned all pretense of discretion. Her phone was now openly recording, capturing not just the original discrimination, but also the management response that seemed designed to make the situation worse. Mr. Fletcher, she said, her surgeon's voice cutting through the cabin's tension. I recorded your employee refusing service to a black passenger while providing identical service to white passengers. That's textbook discrimination, and now you're offering to make it right only after you realized who he is. Rebecca Morrison stepped forward, her professional composure completely shattered. The champagne bottle shook in her hands as she tried to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond her comprehension. I've worked this cabin for 28 years, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and self-righteousness. You learn to read people to understand who really belongs in first class and who's just trying to fit in where they don't belong. The admission fell into the cabin like napalm. Maya Patel's pen flew across her notebook, capturing the exact words that would become the headline of her Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation. James Rothwell pulled out his own phone, his investment banker's instincts, recognizing the moment when a corporate crisis became a media catastrophe. Holy shit, he whispered loud enough for his phone's microphone to pick up. She actually said that. On video. Robert Chen had been making his own calls, quiet conversations in Mandarin, with business associates in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Word was already spreading through Asian business networks that Marcus Chen-Williams had been discriminated against on an Atlantic Airways flight. Ms. Morrison, Robert, said, his English precise and deadly. You have just confessed to racial discrimination on video, in front of witnesses, involving one of America's most powerful technology executives. In Taiwan, we have a saying, "The mountain that refuses to bend before the wind will be uprooted by the storm." You are about to experience a very large storm. Rebecca looked around the cabin, finally beginning to grasp that the other passengers weren't sympathetic observers, but hostile witnesses to her professional suicide. "I wasn't discriminating," she insisted, her voice cracking. "I was making reasonable judgments about passenger profiles and service allocation based on experience and training." Dr. Kim stopped recording and set down her phone. "Ms. Morrison, I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. I've saved thousands of lives in my career. When I fly first class, I pay the same fare as everyone else. Should I expect different service based on my race?" The question was surgical in its precision, designed to force Rebecca into either admitting her discrimination was racial or explaining why some passengers deserve different treatment despite paying identical fares. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed without sound. Her 28 years of training had prepared her to handle difficult passengers' medical emergencies and technical malfunctions, but she had no script for defending systematic racism to a cabin full of hostile witnesses while being recorded for posterity. Marcus stood up from his seat, his movement causing everyone in the cabin to focus on him with laser intensity. He thought about all the times he'd chosen silence over confrontation, professionalism over justice, keeping his head down over standing up. Those days were over. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms and congressional hearings, "you've just witnessed something that happens to passengers of color every day in first-class cabins across America. The only difference is that tonight it was recorded, and tonight there will be consequences." His phone buzzed with another message from Emma. "Dad, #champagne. Gate is trending. Are you the passenger? Please tell me you're about to destroy them." His daughter understood. Sometimes destruction was the only path to justice. Marcus looked directly at Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, in approximately 6 hours, Atlantic Airways stock will begin trading on the New York Stock Exchange. When the market opens, your company will discover what it costs to systematically discriminate against customers who have the resources to respond." Fletcher felt the first cold touch of genuine terror. Stock market consequences meant this incident would become front-page news, trigger federal investigations, and potentially destroy careers at every level of Atlantic Airways' corporate hierarchy. His wife had been right. Some problems couldn't be managed away. They had to be faced with moral courage he'd never possessed. "Sir, that's not necessary," Fletcher said, his diplomatic composure finally cracking completely. "We can resolve this here right now. Full apology service, recovery, whatever you need." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena Vasquez at the Wall Street Journal. "Got your legal team's discrimination complaint. This is front page material. Goes live at 6 a.m. Eastern. Comment." Marcus typed his response while looking Fletcher directly in the eyes. No comment needed. The video speaks for itself. "Mr. Fletcher," Marcus said aloud, "the time for resolution was when your employee first refused me service. Now we're in consequences phase." David Park was pacing his London office like a caged predator, his phone pressed against his ear as he coordinated the most sophisticated corporate warfare campaign in business history. At 43, he'd been Marcus's CFO for 8 years and his closest friend for 12. He'd seen Marcus angry before, but never like this: controlled, methodical, and absolutely lethal. The numbers on his screen told a story of potential devastation. 6.2 million shares of Atlantic Airways stock, worth approximately $418 million at current market prices. Project Constellation, the $850 million technology partnership that represented Atlantic Airways' key to future competitiveness. The patents and licensing agreements that could cripple their operational infrastructure, all of it weaponized by a single moment of discrimination. "Jennifer, are you certain we can execute this without triggering market manipulation investigations?" David asked. speaking to Jennifer Liu at Goldman Sachs. David, institutional investors liquidate large positions constantly. Jennifer replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd handled billion-dollar trades that moved entire market sectors. As long as Marcus has legitimate business reasons for divesting, which he clearly does after tonight's incident, we're legally bulletproof. David stared out his office window at the London skyline, calculating the human cost of what they were about to unleash. Atlantic Airways employed over 45,000 people worldwide. Pension funds, college tuition accounts, retirement dreams, all about to be incinerated because a flight attendant couldn't serve champagne to a black passenger without making assumptions about his worth. But Marcus had been systematically discriminated against by Atlantic Airways for years. Tonight's incident was simply the final data point in a comprehensive case study of corporate racism that needed to be cauterized with extreme prejudice. Execute the trade, David said. Full liquidation at market open. And Jennifer, make it visible. I want every analyst on Wall Street to understand this was intentional corporate warfare. His next call went to Michael Torres, Nexus Technologies head of communications. Michael had managed product launches that moved markets, congressional hearings that changed legislation, and media crises that toppled governments. But he'd never been asked to weaponize his expertise in service of personal justice. We need a press release that explains the stock liquidation, without exposing us to defamation claims, David explained. Something that hints at systematic problems while maintaining legal defensibility. Michael was already drafting language that would become a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. Nexus Technologies has concluded that Atlantic Airways' corporate culture and operational standards represent unacceptable risks to our brand integrity and shareholder interests. This assessment is based on direct observation of systematic failures in customer service equality and professional conduct that are fundamentally incompatible with our values. Back on Flight 447, Marcus was coordinating the destruction of Atlantic Airways, while maintaining the outer calm that had made him one of the most feared negotiators in Silicon Valley. His phone displayed a growing stream of updates from his executive team, each message confirming another piece of the comprehensive response plan. He thought about his daughter Emma, probably following the viral social media coverage from her Stanford dorm room, about his parents in Detroit, who had faced their own catalog of discrimination in an era when consequences were rare and justice was expensive, about every ambitious person of color who had been told through word and deed that they didn't belong in spaces they had earned the right to occupy. Tonight, the bill for decades of accumulated indignities was finally coming due. As Flight 447 continued its journey across the Atlantic, Marcus allowed his mind to travel through the catalog of humiliations that had led to this moment. The champagne incident wasn't isolated. It was the latest entry in a 2-decade collection of assumptions, microaggressions, and systematic discrimination that had followed him from MIT lecture halls to Pentagon briefing rooms. His mixed African-American and Chinese heritage had subjected him to a unique variety of discrimination throughout his career. Tech industry colleagues who assumed his success was due to diversity initiatives, rather than his 17 patents in quantum computing. Defense contractors who questioned his security clearance despite his contributions to national cybersecurity infrastructure. Business partners who spoke slowly to him during negotiations, assuming he needed extra time to understand complex financial structures. The first major incident had occurred when he was 26, just 2 years after founding Nexus Technologies. He'd been invited to present his quantum encryption algorithms to a Pentagon committee evaluating next-generation cybersecurity protocols. The presentation had gone flawlessly, with military brass asking detailed technical questions about implementation timelines and scalability metrics. But afterward, in the VIP lounge reserved for cleared contractors, a security guard had stopped him at the entrance. "Excuse me, son," the guard had said, his tone suggesting Marcus was lost rather than invited. This area is for authorized personnel only. Marcus had produced his security badge, Pentagon invitation, and corporate identification. The guard had examined them like forensic evidence, then made 2 phone calls to verify Marcus's legitimacy, while defense executives streamed past without question. The verification process had lasted 37 minutes. Marcus remembered the exact duration because he'd timed it documenting the incident in a personal journal he'd started keeping after similar encounters became routine rather than exceptional. That Pentagon contract had eventually been worth $340 million to Nexus Technologies, establishing the company as a key player in national security technology. But the humiliation in the VIP lounge had lingered, a reminder that success and wealth couldn't insulate him from the casual racism that permeated American corporate culture. The Atlantic Airways pattern had started 3 years ago during a flight from Los Angeles to New York. Marcus had been traveling to meet with aerospace executives about integrating Nexus AI systems into commercial aircraft, a partnership that would eventually be worth $1.2 billion. The gate agent at LAX had looked at his first-class boarding pass, looked at him, and asked him to step aside for additional verification. The process had involved 3 supervisors, 2 phone calls to airline headquarters, and 45 minutes of Marcus standing in a cordoned area while white passengers boarded without question. The aerospace executives had been forced to wait for his arrival, their confidence in Nexus Technologies' professionalism undermined by the spectacle of their potential partner being treated like a security threat at an airport gate. The deal had proceeded successfully, but the damage to Marcus's dignity had been permanent. He'd quietly transferred his personal travel to competing airlines and begun documenting Atlantic Airways discrimination patterns with the methodical precision he applied to quantum computing problems. Dr. Sarah Kim recognized the 1,000-yard stare in Marcus's eyes, the look of someone mentally cataloging accumulated injuries to their humanity. As a Korean-American woman in the male-dominated field of cardiovascular surgery, she'd developed her own encyclopedia of professional slights assumptions and moments when her competence had been questioned based on appearance rather than performance. "The exhaustion is real, isn't it?" she said quietly. Her words meant for Marcus but audible to other passengers. Having to prove you belong everywhere you go. Having to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Marcus turned from the window, his expression shifting from introspection to recognition. "Some battles choose you," he said. "This one chose me 20 years ago. I just finally decided to fight back with resources that can make the fight count." His phone buzzed with a message from Emma Dad. "I'm watching this blow up on every platform. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit. You're about to be famous in a way that changes everything. Are you ready?" Was he ready? Marcus thought about the quiet life he'd built, the preference for solving problems through technology rather than publicity, the careful balance between success and privacy that had allowed him to build his empire without becoming a public figure. All of that was about to end. After tonight, he would be the black tech executive who brought down an airline over a glass of champagne. The story would be told and retold, analyzed and critiqued, transformed into case studies and cautionary tales. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe some stories needed to be told loudly enough that they couldn't be ignored or minimized or explained away by corporate communications departments. Maya Patel leaned across the aisle. "Dr. Chen-Williams, would you be willing to discuss your history with Atlantic Airways for the record? Not just tonight, but the pattern of discrimination you've experienced." Marcus considered the question. His answer would determine whether the story remained focused on a single incident or expanded into an investigation of systematic bias in corporate America. "Yes," he said. "It's time people understood that discrimination isn't just individual prejudice. It's institutional failure that requires institutional consequences." Elena Vasquez was reviewing financial market data when her encrypted phone buzzed with a message that would define the next phase of her career. As the Wall Street Journal's senior correspondent, covering corporate governance and discrimination, she'd built relationships with sources who trusted her to handle sensitive stories with investigative rigor and appropriate legal caution. The message was from Marcus Chen-Williams' legal team: comprehensive discrimination complaint being filed against Atlantic Airways. Video evidence attached. Stock liquidation and contract termination happening at market open. This will be front-page material. Elena powered up her secure laptop and began the preliminary research that would become a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation. Her initial search revealed Atlantic Airways complaint history: 847 discrimination complaints filed with the Department of Transportation over 5 years. Only 23 resulted in employee termination. The statistics suggested systematic tolerance for civil rights violations, rather than isolated incidents of individual bias. Her first call went to Tom Richardson, a source at DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. Tom, I need comprehensive data on Atlantic Airways discrimination complaints. Patterns, demographics, resolution rates, everything that shows systematic problems. Elena, it's 3 in the morning. It's about to be the biggest corporate discrimination story in decades. Marcus Chen-Williams is going nuclear on Atlantic Airways. This destroys companies and changes industries. While Elena built her investigation, Jennifer Liu was preparing for the most complex stock liquidation of her career. At Goldman Sachs' London trading desk, she specialized in high-volume equity transactions that moved markets and made international headlines. But Marcus Chen-Williams' Atlantic Airways liquidation was unprecedented in its combination of size, timing, and strategic destructive intent. This isn't portfolio rebalancing, she explained to her execution team during their 4 a.m. coordination call. This is corporate warfare disguised as investment management. We're liquidating 6.2 million shares with maximum visibility and devastating market impact. Her team had coordinated with NYSE specialists, prepared algorithmic execution protocols, and modeled the cascading effects that would occur when Atlantic Airways stock entered freefall. High-frequency trading systems would detect the massive selling pressure and begin shorting the stock, automatically accelerating the collapse through algorithmic amplification. ATLC closed yesterday at $67.42. Jennifer continued. Our modeling suggests the stock will breach circuit breakers within 2 hours, probably stabilizing around $41, if we're lucky. $33 if panic selling takes over. They'll lose 40% of market value before most executives finish their morning coffee. Michael Torres was crafting the public relations campaign that would transform Marcus's personal discrimination complaint into a broader narrative about corporate accountability and systematic bias in American business culture. His press release would be studied in communications graduate programs for decades. The language has to be precise, he explained to his team. Clear enough that every business journalist understands we're describing systematic racism, diplomatic enough that we avoid defamation liability, powerful enough that it becomes the definitive statement on corporate discrimination consequences. The release he crafted was a masterpiece of corporate communications, following comprehensive evaluation of our strategic partnerships and direct assessment of systematic failures in customer service equality. Nexus Technologies has concluded that Atlantic Airways' corporate culture represents unacceptable risks to our brand integrity and operational values. We are immediately terminating all business relationships with Atlantic Airways, including divestiture of our complete equity position and cancellation of existing technology partnerships. This decision reflects our unwavering commitment to dignity, respect, and equal treatment as non-negotiable business standards. Back on Flight 447, social media was creating its own narrative around the incident with viral velocity that no corporate crisis management team could control. Dr. Kim's Twitter thread had exploded across multiple platforms, at Dr. Sarah Kim, MD, thread 1 of 12. Currently witnessing systematic discrimination at Atlantic Airways Flight 447. Black passenger denied champagne served to all white passengers. Flight attendant specifically said they're being selective with premium service. Recording everything. Hashtag champagne. Gate 14. 847. Retweets. 52. 391 likes. 923 comments in the first hour. Top trending reply from @CivilRightsLaw. This is exactly how institutional racism operates. Selective service policies that somehow always select against people of color. At Atlantic Airways, this requires immediate investigation. The hashtag ChampagneGate was trending nationally within 90 minutes, amplified by celebrity accounts, civil rights organizations, and verified users with millions of followers. Each retweet created a viral feedback loop that exponentially increased the story's reach and cultural impact. Maya Patel was drafting her Financial Times coverage, using the newspaper's mobile publishing platform, preparing a story that would run in the next day's international edition. Her preliminary research into Marcus Chen-Williams had revealed the full scope of his technological empire and the devastating resources available for corporate warfare. This represents a fundamental shift in discrimination accountability, she wrote in her lead paragraph. When systematic bias meets adversaries with quantum computing resources and strategic patience, the traditional corporate assumption that discrimination remains hidden and consequences remain minimal becomes lethally obsolete. Thomas Fletcher was monitoring the social media explosion from the business class galley, watching his airline career evaporate in real time through Twitter metrics and trending hashtags. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Sarah. "Dad, are you on the flight that's going viral? Please tell me you fixed whatever's happening up there." He hadn't fixed anything. He'd failed to recognize discrimination, failed to address it competently, and failed to understand that modern customer service failures could destroy entire corporations within hours of being recorded and broadcast. His 24 years of service, his daughter's wedding fund, his comfortable retirement, all disappearing because he'd chosen institutional loyalty over moral courage when it mattered most. Dr. Chen-Williams Fletcher said, making one final attempt at damage control that he knew was already too late. What can Atlantic Airways do to prevent this situation from escalating further? Marcus looked up from his phone where he'd been coordinating the systematic destruction of Fletcher's employer with the same methodical precision he applied to quantum computing problems. The question was reasonable, professional, and approximately 4 hours too late to matter. "Mr. Fletcher Marcus," said his voice carrying the finality of someone who had moved beyond negotiation into execution, "there is no prevention. There are only consequences." At precisely 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Jennifer Liu watched her trading screens with the focused intensity of a cardiac surgeon performing a complex operation. The Goldman Sachs trading floor had been prepared for what she privately called the Chen-Williams execution, a coordinated liquidation designed to destroy Atlantic Airways stock with maximum efficiency and devastating public visibility. "Execute," she said into her headset. The first sell order hit the New York Stock Exchange like a financial depth charge. 500,000 shares of ATLC offered at market price, instantly absorbed by automated trading systems programmed to purchase large institutional blocks. But within seconds, the algorithms recognized this wasn't routine portfolio rebalancing. This was coordinated liquidation warfare. Jennifer stared at her screens, watching numbers that represented real people's lives. Every percentage point drop meant pension funds evaporating, college tuition money disappearing, retirement dreams dying. "This is going to destroy thousands of families," her junior trader whispered, watching the stock price plummet in real time. That's what discrimination costs, Jennifer replied grimly. The bill was always going to come due. Atlantic Airways just never thought it would be this expensive. Atlantic Airways stock began its death spiral immediately. From the previous close of $67.42 to $64.15 to $61.80, the decline accelerating as high-frequency trading systems detected the massive selling pressure and began shorting ATLC shares by the millions, betting on continued collapse and ensuring it through automated trading amplification. Harrison Blackwood was reviewing quarterly operational reports when his assistant burst into his corner office with the expression of someone delivering news about a plane crash. "Mr. Blackwood, our stock is in free fall, down 19% in the first 12 minutes. Someone's executing massive institutional liquidation." Blackwood grabbed her tablet, his executive breakfast forgotten. The screen showed ATLC's stock chart, looking like an EKG of a dying patient, a nearly vertical red line representing hundreds of millions in market value evaporation. "What the hell is happening?" he demanded. "Market crash, banking crisis. Federal investigation." "No, sir. It's targeted. Someone's liquidating what looks like a 7% stake. The analysts are calling it institutional warfare. 7%. Blackwood knew exactly which investor held that position. Nexus Technologies. Marcus Chen-Williams' quantum computing empire had been courting Atlantic Airways for 3 years, culminating in Project Constellation, the $850 million technology partnership that was supposed to modernize their entire operational infrastructure. Get Marcus Chen-Williams on the phone immediately. But Marcus's phone was routing all calls to voicemail, and Nexus Technologies' communications department was providing identical responses to every inquiry. "Mr. Chen-Williams is unavailable for comment. All media inquiries should be directed to our external public relations firm." Amanda Richardson, Atlantic Airways' chief legal officer, was dealing with an even more immediate crisis. A process server had delivered a comprehensive federal discrimination complaint, filed simultaneously with multiple agencies: Department of Transportation, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and the Southern District of New York. The complaint was devastating in its thoroughness and precision. Dr. Sarah Kim's video recordings were embedded as exhibits, along with witness statements from Maya Patel, James Rothwell, and Robert Chen. The filing included detailed analysis of Atlantic Airways' complaint, handling procedures, internal communications about passenger profiling, and statistical analysis showing discriminatory patterns across multiple routes and aircraft. "We're completely fucked," Amanda said to her deputy, abandoning corporate euphemisms. "This isn't just discrimination litigation. It's a federal civil rights investigation with high-definition video evidence and multiple credible witnesses." Rebecca Morrison was preparing for yoga class when her phone rang with a call that would destroy her career in less than 30 seconds. "Ms. Morrison, this is Sandra Williams from corporate HR. You've been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation of last night's incident. Do not report for scheduled flights. Do not contact crew members. Do not speak to media. Termination paperwork will be delivered to your residence this afternoon." The line went dead. Rebecca turned on CNN and found herself watching breaking news coverage of Atlantic Airways' stock collapse, with her discrimination incident featured as the catalyst for corporate destruction. The stunning decline in Atlantic Airways shares appears directly connected to viral video showing discriminatory service toward Dr. Marcus Chen-Williams, CEO of Nexus Technologies, the anchor reported. The incident has sparked federal investigations and demands for congressional hearings on systematic discrimination in the airline industry. Rebecca sank onto her sofa as the full scope of her mistake crystallized. She'd discriminated against one of the most powerful technology executives in America, triggering corporate warfare that was simultaneously destroying her employer and her career. By 10:45 a.m., Atlantic Airways stock had lost 28% of its value, breaching multiple circuit breaker thresholds that automatically halted trading to prevent complete market panic. The company's market capitalization had shrunk by $1.8 billion in less time than a typical first-class meal service. But the financial damage was just beginning. Rebecca Morrison's decision to appear on the Diane Phillips show represented perhaps the most catastrophic miscalculation in a series of escalating disasters. Booked on the daytime talk show that specialized in confrontational interviews and viral controversy, Rebecca hoped to explain her actions demonstrate personal growth and salvage some remnant of her reputation. Instead, she walked into a carefully orchestrated public execution broadcast to 4.2 million viewers. Diane Phillips had reviewed Dr. Sarah Kim's viral video dozens of times, consulted with civil rights attorneys, and prepared questions designed to expose the unconscious assumptions that drove discriminatory behavior. Her approach was surgically precise and devastatingly effective. Rebecca, let's start simple, Diane said, her voice carrying the deceptive gentleness of a prosecutor lulling a witness into false security. You served champagne to 3 white passengers, then refused identical service to Dr. Chen-Williams, who is black. What was your reasoning? Rebecca had practiced this answer during sleepless nights since her termination, crafting explanations that minimized culpability while expressing appropriate regret. But under studio lights, facing millions of viewers who had already seen video evidence of her discrimination, her prepared words crumbled into defensive rambling. Look, I've worked first class for 28 years, she began, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and indignation. You develop instincts about passengers, about service standards and passenger expectations. Dr. Chen-Williams was dressed very casually, and he didn't present like our typical premium demographic. The admission detonated in the studio like a verbal grenade. Diane leaned forward, her professional neutrality shifting toward barely controlled outrage. He didn't present like your demographic, Diane repeated with prosecutorial precision. Can you clarify what your typical premium demographic looks like? Rebecca. The trap was perfectly constructed, and Rebecca walked directly into it, with devastating naivety. Well, you know, polished appearance, business attire, expensive accessories, the kind of sophisticated presentation that suggests comfort with luxury service environments. People who understand premium cabin expectations. Rebecca, Dr. Chen-Williams runs a company worth $47 billion. He holds 17 patents in quantum computing. He's been featured on Forbes covers. What exactly about his appearance suggested he didn't understand luxury service? Rebecca's panic made her dig deeper rather than retreat. It wasn't about his race, she insisted, her voice rising defensively. It was about presentation behavior, the way passengers carry themselves. Some people just don't seem comfortable in upscale environments, and you learn to recognize the signs. The interview continued for 14 excruciating minutes, with Rebecca systematically destroying any sympathy she might have generated. Each answer revealed deeper layers of unconscious bias, racial assumptions, and the systematic discrimination that civil rights attorneys document in their most compelling cases. The clip went viral within hours, generating millions of views and becoming the definitive example of how unconscious racism operated in corporate America. Champagne Karen became the top trending hashtag globally, with users sharing their own discrimination experiences and demanding accountability from Atlantic Airways and the broader service industry. Rebecca's personal information leaked online within hours of the broadcast. Her home address, phone number, employment history, and social media profiles were disseminated across platforms, leading to harassment campaigns that forced her to disconnect utilities and stay with relatives to escape media attention. 3 months after the incident, Rebecca sat in Dr. Elena Martinez's office, tears streaming down her face as she confronted the reality of her unconscious biases for the first time in her adult life. "I keep replaying it," she said, her voice breaking with genuine anguish. "How many other passengers did I treat differently without even realizing? How many careers did I damage with my assumptions? How many people felt humiliated because I couldn't see past my own prejudices?" "That's the first step toward meaningful change," Dr. Martinez said gently, her expertise in racial reconciliation evident in her patient approach. Acknowledging unconscious patterns is how we begin to dismantle them. The question is, what do you want to do with this awareness? Rebecca looked up, her eyes red but determined. "I want to make sure no other airline employee makes the same mistakes I made. I want to turn this disaster into education that prevents other people from being hurt." Harrison Blackwood faced his own professional execution during the emergency Atlantic Airways board meeting convened to address the mushrooming crisis. The discussion was conducted via encrypted video conference due to the media circus surrounding company headquarters, and the tone was brutal from the opening statement. "Harrison, this is a complete catastrophe," said Margaret Foster, the board's lead independent director and former hotel chain CEO. "We've lost $2.8 billion in market cap. We're facing federal investigations, congressional hearings, and our brand has become synonymous with systematic racism. This ends today." The board's vote was unanimous. Blackwood would resign immediately, forfeit his severance package, and accept full responsibility for the cultural failures that had led to Atlantic Airways' destruction. His personal fortune, built largely on company stock options and performance bonuses, evaporated along with the share price. The Hamptons estate went on the market within a week. His country club membership was quietly terminated. His wife, Margaret, found herself excluded from social circles that had defined their lifestyle for 2 decades. 28 years building this company. Blackwood said to his empty office window, watching protesters gather on the street below. "Destroyed by a glass of champagne and decades of willful blindness." But it hadn't been destroyed by champagne. It had been destroyed by systematic discrimination, corporate arrogance, and the lethal assumption that consequences would never come for companies that treated customers as less than human based on their appearance. The human cost extended far beyond individuals directly involved in the discrimination. Atlantic Airways announced layoffs affecting 8,400 employees, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, administrative staff who had dedicated their careers to the airline and found themselves unemployed through no fault of their own. Thomas Fletcher stared at his termination letter, thinking about his daughter's wedding next month and the college fund he'd been building for his granddaughter. 24 years of airline service gone because he'd chosen institutional loyalty over moral courage when it mattered most. His wife Sarah had been right during their argument 6 months earlier. "You can't just manage problems away, Tom. Sometimes you have to take a stand for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." He'd chosen management over morality. Now he had neither career prospects nor self-respect, and his family was paying the price for his cowardice. The congressional hearing room was packed beyond fire code capacity when Harrison Blackwood took his seat at the witness table 5 weeks after his resignation as CEO of Atlantic Airways. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee had moved quickly to schedule hearings on discrimination in the airline industry, recognizing that the Atlantic Airways scandal represented a broader pattern of systematic bias requiring federal intervention. Congressman James Rodriguez, the committee chairman and veteran civil rights advocate, opened the questioning with prosecutorial precision, reflecting 30 years of experience holding corporate executives accountable for systematic failures. "Mr. Blackwood, our investigation reveals that Atlantic Airways received 847 formal discrimination complaints over 5 years. How many resulted in employee termination for discriminatory behavior?" Blackwood consulted briefing materials his legal team had prepared, searching for answers that would minimize culpability without appearing evasive. The statistics were damning, regardless of presentation. Congressman, we investigated all complaints according to established protocols and implemented appropriate disciplinary measures when violations were substantiated. That's not what I asked, Rodriguez interrupted sharply. How many employees were terminated for discrimination? Give me a number. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Blackwood realized there was no diplomatic way to present the data. 23 employees were terminated for substantiated discrimination violations. 23. Out of 847 documented complaints about discriminatory treatment based on race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. Atlantic Airways had fired fewer than 3% of accused employees. The statistic was devastating evidence of systematic tolerance for civil rights violations. The number hung in the hearing room like toxic gas, generating audible gasps from the gallery and furious note-taking from journalists covering the proceedings. Congresswoman Patricia Lee, representing California's technology corridor, where many of Marcus's colleagues had followed the story, leaned into her microphone with intensity, born of personal experience with workplace discrimination. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Chen-Williams, is a constituent of mine. He's created thousands of high-paying jobs, contributed millions in tax revenue, and represents American innovation at its finest. When he pays for first-class service, should he expect treatment equal to white passengers? The question was designed to force Blackwood into either defending discrimination explicitly or admitting that Atlantic Airways had systematically failed its customers of color. Either answer would be used against the company in ongoing litigation and regulatory proceedings. Congresswoman, all passengers deserve equal treatment regardless of background, Blackwood said, falling back on corporate platitudes that had served him poorly throughout the crisis. Then explain the champagne incident. Explain 847 discrimination complaints with 23 terminations. Explain a corporate culture that allowed systematic bias to flourish for years without meaningful consequences. Blackwood had no explanation because no acceptable explanation existed. Atlantic Airways had tolerated discrimination because addressing it was expensive and inconvenient. They had ignored complaints because investigations required resources and admitting problems created legal liability. The hearing continued for 9 hours, with Republicans and Democrats alike demanding accountability and threatening regulatory sanctions that could reshape the entire aviation industry. By the time Blackwood was dismissed, Atlantic Airways faced federal oversight that would cost hundreds of millions in compliance expenses and operational restrictions. Elena Vasquez's follow-up Wall Street Journal investigation had uncovered additional evidence of systematic discrimination extending across multiple airlines, revealing industry-wide patterns of bias that went far beyond Atlantic Airways' corporate failures. Her Pulitzer Prize-winning series documented discriminatory seating policies that systematically moved passengers of color away from premium cabins, biased complaint, handling procedures that dismissed civil rights violations as customer service issues, and internal communications showing executives making jokes about problem demographics and certain types of passengers. The Atlantic Airways incident represents the moment when systematic discrimination met systematic consequences, her award-winning article concluded. When corporate bias encounters adversaries with sufficient resources and strategic patience, traditional assumptions about hidden discrimination and minimal accountability become lethally obsolete. The investigation triggered federal probes at 8 major airlines, congressional oversight hearings across multiple committees, and civil rights lawsuits that would cost the industry billions in settlements and compliance modifications. It also provided crucial evidence for Marcus Chen-Williams' comprehensive legal case against Atlantic Airways. The lawsuit, when finally filed, was a masterpiece of legal strategy and corporate warfare. It combined Marcus's personal discrimination claims with broader allegations of systematic bias, consumer fraud, breach of contract, and violations of federal civil rights statutes. The financial demands were staggering: $150 million in personal damages for humiliation and reputational harm, $750 million in punitive damages to deter future discrimination, $850 million for Project Constellation, contract termination, and $3.2 billion for systematic discrimination affecting an estimated 75,000 passengers over 5 years. Atlantic Airways insurance coverage was woefully inadequate for liabilities of this magnitude. The company's credit rating was downgraded to junk status, making refinancing impossible and triggering acceleration clauses in existing debt agreements. Within 6 months of the Champagne incident, Atlantic Airways filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, citing impossible legal liabilities and irreparable reputational damage that had destroyed customer confidence and operational viability. The bankruptcy filing confirmed what industry analysts had predicted: systematic discrimination, when confronted by adversaries with quantum computing resources and unlimited strategic patience, could destroy even established corporations with decades of operational history and billions in tangible assets. Rebecca Morrison's Champagne service failure had officially become the most expensive customer service incident in aviation history, and the consequences were still expanding across the industry. 8 months after being denied Champagne in Seat 1B, Marcus Chen-Williams sat in federal bankruptcy court, watching the liquidation of Atlantic Airways with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a completed experiment. Judge Catherine Morrison presided over proceedings with efficient gravity, overseeing the dismantlement of a company that had once carried presidents and celebrities across the globe. The irony of the judge's name was not lost on anyone present. Rebecca Morrison had destroyed Atlantic Airways. Judge Catherine Morrison was now officiating its corporate funeral. Atlantic Airways assets were being auctioned to the highest bidder aircraft, leased back to manufacturers' maintenance facilities, sold to cargo operators, route authorities distributed among competitors. The company that had been worth $11 billion 2 years earlier was being sold for scrap like a luxury car in a salvage yard. Marcus sat quietly in the gallery, his characteristic understated clothing drawing no attention from the crowd of creditors, lawyers, and reporters. David Park sat beside him, carrying a leather portfolio containing the most audacious acquisition proposal in aviation history. "The brand is toxic," David whispered, as the auctioneer described jet engine inventories and landing slot portfolios. Atlantic Airways is synonymous with systematic discrimination and corporate failure. Every marketing consultant in America would advise against touching this name. Marcus had been wrestling with the same question for months. The rational business decision would be to let Atlantic Airways die, completely allow competitors to acquire valuable operational assets, and move on to more profitable investments with fewer complications and better public relations optics. But some decisions transcend rational business analysis and enter the realm of moral imperative. "I'm not resurrecting Atlantic Airways," Marcus replied quietly. "I'm proving that corporate cultures can be rebuilt rather than just destroyed. I'm demonstrating that systematic discrimination can be replaced with systematic dignity when leadership commits to transformation rather than just damage control." When the auctioneer called for bids on Atlantic Airways' core operating assets, brand name landing slots, operational infrastructure, and route authorities, the courtroom expected prolonged silence. Most potential acquirers had concluded that the airline's reputation was too damaged for rehabilitation, the regulatory scrutiny too intense, the public relations challenges too overwhelming. David Park stood and announced Meridian Holdings' offer. 1. $6 billion in cash. Immediate assumption of all employee pension obligations. Guaranteed severance payments for laid-off workers. Commitment to rehire qualified former employees under new management. and establishment of a $100 million fund for discrimination victims. The offer stunned everyone present. Meridian Holdings was a newly formed entity, but its financial backing was unquestionably solid. Nexus Technologies, supported by a consortium of socially conscious investment funds that viewed corporate transformation as both moral imperative and potentially profitable long-term investment strategy. Judge Morrison reviewed the proposal with careful attention, understanding that this acquisition represented more than financial transaction. It was an attempt at corporate resurrection through systematic culture change. The bid exceeded minimum requirements substantially, provided superior creditor protection, and came from financially qualified buyers with a comprehensive rehabilitation plan that addressed both operational viability and social justice concerns. Sold to Meridian Holdings, she announced the gavel falling with finality that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Marcus Chen-Williams now owned the airline that had discriminated against him, along with all opportunities for redemption and transformation that ownership provided. The real work was just beginning. The all-hands meeting in JFK's Hangar 12 was unprecedented in aviation history. 4,000 former Atlantic Airways employees had gathered in the cavernous space, their faces reflecting hope, skepticism, and desperate need for employment after 8 months of uncertainty and financial hardship. They expected corporate platitudes about fresh starts and new beginnings delivered by executives who would disappear after media attention faded. Instead, Marcus Chen-Williams walked onto the makeshift stage alone, wearing the same gray hoodie that Rebecca Morrison had judged unworthy of first-class service 8 months earlier. The symbolism was intentional and unmistakable to everyone present. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hangar's professional sound system. "I'm Marcus Chen-Williams, and I'm the person who destroyed your company." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled employees. Corporate executives typically avoided responsibility for controversial decisions, especially in public settings where admissions could be used in ongoing litigation or regulatory proceedings. Marcus was doing precisely the opposite, accepting full accountability for Atlantic Airways' destruction, while using that acknowledgement as foundation for something unprecedented in American corporate culture. "Let me be absolutely clear about what happened." He continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. Atlantic Airways failed because it systematically discriminated against customers, ignored civil rights complaints, and created a culture where bias was acceptable, as long as it remained subtle enough to avoid federal intervention. The company's destruction wasn't caused by market conditions, competitive pressure, or external economic factors. It was the inevitable result of moral failure that became too expensive for stakeholders to tolerate. Dr. Aisha Johnson, the former Southwest Airlines executive recruited to serve as Meridian Airlines' CEO, watched from beside the stage as Marcus delivered perhaps the most honest speech ever given by a corporate leader to employees of a failed company. Her own experience navigating racial discrimination in the airline industry had prepared her for this moment. She understood the difference between cosmetic diversity initiatives and systematic culture change, between managing public relations crises and implementing sustainable organizational transformation. "The old Atlantic Airways is dead," Marcus said with funeral finality. "It died because it deserved to die. But you, the pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, and support staff who made that airline function, you didn't deserve to lose your jobs because of management's moral failures and systematic institutional cowardice." He paused, looking at faces that represented decades of aviation experience, accumulated expertise, and economic anxiety that had torn families apart over months of unemployment. Today we're offering something different. Not just jobs, but opportunity to build an airline that practices the values Atlantic Airways claimed, but never implemented. An airline where discrimination is prosecuted rather than tolerated, where customers are respected regardless of appearance or perceived social status, where employees are partners in creating systematic dignity rather than expendable resources in maintaining profitable bias. Carlos Martinez Meridian's head of diversity and inclusion stepped forward carrying comprehensive policy documents that would govern every aspect of the new company's operations. His background included senior positions at the NAACP Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center, sending unmistakable signals about the company's commitment to transformation rather than reformation. We will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination training program in aviation history. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had committed unlimited resources to systematic change. Every employee from entry-level positions to senior management will complete quarterly bias prevention programs developed by leading civil rights experts. We will establish independent passenger advocacy positions with authority to investigate complaints and implement immediate corrections. The promises were expensive, ambitious, and exactly what the aviation industry needed to hear after months of discrimination scandals and congressional hearings. But promises were easy to make and notoriously difficult to keep, especially in industries with razor-thin profit margins and intense competitive pressure. Marcus understood the skepticism and had prepared for it with characteristic thoroughness. "I know you've heard corporate transformation promises before," he said, acknowledging doubt directly rather than pretending it didn't exist. "But understand my motivation here. 8 months ago, I was humiliated in first class by employees who judged me by appearance rather than treating me as a paying customer with equal rights to service and dignity." He gestured toward the draped Atlantic Airways logo on the hangar wall, now covered in black fabric, as a symbol of corporate death. That humiliation cost Atlantic Airways $3 billion in market value and ultimately destroyed the company entirely. Corporate culture isn't about policies and training programs. It's about accountability, consequences, and willingness to enforce standards when enforcement is expensive, inconvenient, or threatens established power structures. The moment had come for the most audacious decision in corporate redemption history. "Rebecca Morrison, would you please join me on stage?" The request sent shockwaves through the assembled employees. Rebecca Morrison had become the symbol of everything wrong with Atlantic Airways culture, the face of discrimination that had destroyed their company and cost them their livelihoods. Many employees blamed her personally for their unemployment and financial hardship. But Marcus had a different plan for Rebecca Morrison, one that would challenge every assumption about punishment redemption and the possibility of systematic personal transformation. She walked to the stage with visible reluctance, showing the physical and emotional strain of 8 months of public scrutiny, death threats, and personal reflection guided by civil rights counselors. When she reached the microphone, Marcus stepped back, giving her space to address colleagues whose lives had been disrupted by her discriminatory actions. "I want to start by apologizing," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with emotion that 8 months of counseling had taught her to access and articulate. "Not just to Dr. Chen-Williams, but to every person who lost their job because of my behavior. I thought I was following proper procedures, applying experience-based judgment about passenger service allocation. But I was wrong. I was discriminating based on racial assumptions I didn't even recognize I was making." The hangar was absolutely silent. 4,000 people listening to a woman publicly confront her prejudices and accept responsibility for consequences that had destroyed an entire company. "I've spent 8 months learning about unconscious bias, systematic racism, and the impact of discrimination on people's lives." Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger as she found the courage to be completely honest. "I've worked with Dr. Elena Martinez and the Southern Poverty Law Center to understand how my assumptions hurt passengers and perpetuated systematic exclusion. I can't undo what I did, and I can't restore the jobs you lost. But I can promise to spend the rest of my career ensuring other airline employees don't make the same mistakes." Marcus returned to the microphone. Ms. Morrison will join Meridian Airlines as Director of Bias Prevention and Customer Service Excellence. She will develop and oversee our anti-discrimination training programs, working directly with civil rights organizations to ensure the culture that destroyed Atlantic Airways never takes root at Meridian. The decision to hire Rebecca Morrison in a senior diversity role was controversial, risky, and exactly the kind of bold transformation that would define Meridian Airlines' approach to corporate change. Rather than simply punishing discrimination, the company was investing in redemption education and the radical possibility that people could change when given proper training, accountability structures, and genuine opportunities for growth. 14 months after the Champagne incident that destroyed Atlantic Airways, Meridian Airlines prepared for its inaugural flight. The aircraft was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, identical to the plane that had carried Marcus on his fateful journey from JFK to Heathrow. But everything about the experience had been redesigned from foundational principles of human dignity and operational excellence. Flight crew selection had been personally overseen by Dr. Aisha Johnson, with comprehensive input from Carlos Martinez and Rebecca Morrison. Every crew member had completed over 200 hours of bias prevention training, customer service excellence programs, cultural competency workshops, and scenario-based exercises involving passengers from different backgrounds, economic circumstances, and cultural traditions. The passenger cabin had been redesigned with accessibility, comfort, and dignity as primary considerations rather than afterthoughts. Premium seats were available based solely on willingness to pay, and seat availability with absolutely no subjective judgments about who belonged in different service classes. Service protocols emphasized consistent treatment for all passengers, regardless of appearance, accent, perceived social status, or assumptions about their economic circumstances. Marcus had booked Seat 1B for the inaugural flight, the identical seat number he'd occupied on Flight 447. The symbolism was intentional and powerful, demonstrating that Meridian Airlines represented not just a new company, but a revolutionary approach to aviation that prioritized human dignity alongside operational efficiency and financial sustainability. Keiko Tanaka, Meridian's head flight attendant, approached his seat with professional warmth that reflected genuine customer respect rather than calculated performance for supervisory evaluation. At 34, she had worked for 3 different airlines during her career, experiencing firsthand the toxic cultures that had plagued aviation for decades and made discrimination incidents inevitable rather than exceptional. Dr. Chen-Williams, welcome aboard Meridian Airlines' inaugural flight, she said, her smile genuine and unforced, reflecting months of training that emphasized authentic human connection rather than scripted customer service interactions. It's an honor to have you with us today. May I offer you our signature champagne to celebrate this historic moment. The service was delivered without hesitation, qualification, or any suggestion that champagne required special justification or verification of passenger worthiness. Marcus was a premium passenger. Champagne was part of the service offering, and Keiko's job was providing excellent customer service to every passenger on the aircraft, without exception or discrimination. I would love that. Thank you, Marcus replied, accepting the crystal flute with satisfaction that transcended simple beverage service and encompassed the systematic transformation of an entire industry's approach to human dignity. Dr. Sarah Kim occupied Seat 1A, having specifically requested to fly on Meridian's inaugural flight as both personal support for the company's transformation efforts and professional validation of the changes she had helped document and inspire. As the surgeon whose video recording had triggered Atlantic Airways' destruction, she had become an inadvertent civil rights icon, invited to speak at medical conferences, business schools, and congressional hearings about discrimination in corporate America. Dr. Kim Keiko said, offering identical champagne service with the same warmth, professionalism, and respect that reflected systematic training rather than individual goodwill. "Welcome aboard. May I offer our signature champagne?" "Thank you, that would be perfect," Sarah replied, noting with professional satisfaction the consistent service that reflected genuine culture change, rather than temporary public relations performance designed to manage crisis aftermath. Maya Patel had been invited to document Meridian's inaugural flight for the Financial Times, her Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of airline discrimination having established her as the definitive journalist covering corporate transformation in the aviation industry. She occupied Seat 1F, the same position from which she had witnessed the discrimination incident that changed everything about how systematic bias was confronted and corrected in American corporate culture. "The contrast is remarkable," she told Marcus, during pre-flight service, her trained journalist's eye noting details that would become part of her comprehensive coverage. Same aircraft type, same route configuration, same basic service structure. But the culture is completely different. You can feel it in crew interactions, passenger treatment, their fundamental approach to human dignity as a business imperative. Marcus nodded, watching flight attendants move through the cabin with efficiency and genuine courtesy that reflected months of comprehensive training rather than superficial sensitivity workshops. "Systematic culture change is absolutely possible," he said. "It requires accountability, sustained investment, and willingness to admit that traditional methods were morally wrong and economically unsustainable. But it's not only possible, it's profitable when implemented correctly." The flight from JFK to Heathrow proceeded without incident drama or discrimination of any kind. Passengers received attentive service regardless of background appearance or perceived social status. Crew members treated every customer with respect, professionalism, and dignity that should have been industry standard for decades, but had required corporate destruction and systematic rebuilding to achieve. Rebecca Morrison monitored the inaugural flight from Meridian's Operations Center, tracking customer feedback, crew performance, and dozens of metrics that would determine whether cultural transformation was genuine and sustainable or merely temporary performance designed for media consumption. Her role as Director of Bias Prevention had evolved into something unprecedented in corporate America, a senior executive position dedicated entirely to identifying, preventing, and correcting discriminatory behavior before it could harm customers, damage company reputation, or recreate the systematic failures that had destroyed Atlantic Airways. Customer satisfaction scores are exceptional across all demographic categories, she reported to Dr. Johnson during flight progress briefings, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had transformed personal failure into systematic success. Social media sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. Crew performance metrics exceed expectations in every measured category. Meridian Airlines' inaugural flight success proved that comprehensive corporate transformation was achievable through systematic change rather than cosmetic public relations adjustments. Companies could acknowledge past failures, honestly accept full responsibility for harm caused, and implement measurable improvements that produce demonstrably different outcomes for customers and employees alike. The boardroom at Meridian Airlines headquarters commanded spectacular Manhattan skyline views, but Marcus Chen-Williams focused entirely on quarterly reports spread across the polished conference table. 24 months after the company's launch from Atlantic Airways wreckage, the numbers told a transformation story that exceeded even his most optimistic projections and challenged every assumption about the relationship between social justice and business profitability. Customer satisfaction, 97, 3% positive across all demographic categories, highest in industry history. Employee retention, 98.1% compared to 74% industry average. On-time performance, 93.4%, ranking first among major carriers for 8 consecutive quarters. Revenue per passenger mile, 23% above projected targets, driven by premium pricing for dignity-focused service. Discrimination complaints. 0 substantiated incidents in 24 months of operation across 127,000 flights. Dr. Aisha Johnson reviewed the financial results with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully merged social justice goals with profitable business operations, proving that ethical leadership and economic success were not competing priorities, but mutually reinforcing strategies when implemented with genuine commitment and adequate resources. Wall Street analysts are calling this the most successful airline transformation in aviation history, she reported to the board, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had rebuilt an entire corporate culture from foundational principles. More importantly, we're demonstrating that ethical business practices and sustained profitability aren't just compatible. They create competitive advantages that traditional discrimination-tolerant companies cannot match. Carlos Martinez presented diversity and inclusion metrics that had become central to Meridian's operational identity and brand differentiation strategy. The company employed staff from 61 countries, speaking 34 languages, natively creating natural cultural competency that enhanced customer service across all international routes. Leadership positions were held by women and minorities at rates that exceeded national averages in every category and geographic region. Pay equity audits conducted by independent firms showed no statistically significant disparities based on gender, race, ethnicity, or national origin, an achievement that required constant vigilance and systematic correction, but had eliminated the legal liabilities and reputational risks that plagued competitors. We're not just talking about diversity as a moral imperative. Carlos explained to board members who represented various investment funds and social impact organizations. We are proving that inclusive workplaces produce measurably superior customer service, higher employee satisfaction, stronger financial results, and sustainable competitive advantages that can't be replicated by companies that treat diversity as public relations strategy rather than operational necessity. Rebecca Morrison's presentation focused on bias prevention programs that had become Meridian's signature innovation and were being licensed to hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and service companies across multiple industries. Her journey from discrimination perpetrator to leading prevention expert had become a Harvard Business School case study and inspiration for corporate redemption programs worldwide. We've maintained 0 discrimination incidents because we created systematic prevention rather than reactive punishment. She explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed personal failure into institutional success. Every employee interaction follows protocols emphasizing consistent treatment, cultural competency, and human dignity as non-negotiable business standards rather than optional sensitivity considerations. Meridian's success had attracted attention far beyond the aviation industry and was being studied by corporate transformation experts, civil rights organizations, and business schools as proof that systematic discrimination could be replaced with systematic dignity when leadership committed resources and sustained attention to culture change rather than crisis management. Marcus had been invited to address the World Economic Forum, United Nations Global Compact, Harvard Business School, and dozens of corporate conferences where business leaders wanted to understand how discrimination incidents could be transformed into successful business models that created value for shareholders while advancing social justice. His message remained consistent across all platforms: accountability for past failures, investment in systematic change, and courage to admit that traditional business practices were both morally wrong and economically unsustainable in an interconnected global economy where reputation traveled at the speed of social media. The champagne incident wasn't about one passenger being denied service. He told audiences worldwide, from Fortune 500 boardrooms to civil rights conferences. It was about corporate culture that had normalized discrimination so thoroughly that employees didn't recognize systematic bias as discrimination. Changing that required more than sensitivity training or diversity seminars. It required rebuilding fundamental approaches to human relationships as business strategy. His daughter Emma, now a junior at Stanford, studying social impact investing, had written her economics thesis on Meridian Airlines as a case study in stakeholder capitalism that prioritized human dignity alongside shareholder returns. Her research had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Business Ethics and was being cited by academics studying the relationship between social justice and sustained profitability. "Dad," she had told him during their most recent conversation, "you didn't just change an airline. You proved that doing the right thing can be the most profitable thing when you commit to it completely, rather than treating it as public relations strategy." Meridian Airlines' transformation had catalyzed systematic changes throughout the aviation industry and across multiple sectors of the American economy. Within 30 months of Atlantic Airways' collapse, every major airline had implemented enhanced anti-discrimination training programs, customer service protocols, emphasizing consistent treatment, executive positions dedicated to diversity and inclusion, and transparent reporting systems for bias complaints and resolution procedures. The changes weren't cosmetic public relations adjustments designed to manage media attention. Federal regulations now required airlines to report discrimination complaints quarterly with detailed demographic breakdowns, resolution timelines, and corrective action implementations. Companies showing discriminatory patterns faced increased regulatory scrutiny, substantial financial penalties, and potential license suspension that could destroy operational viability. Congressional legislation formally titled the Passenger Dignity and Service Equality Act, but universally known as the Champagne Bill, established comprehensive federal customer service standards for the aviation industry. Airlines were required to demonstrate non-discrimination policy compliance through regular independent audits, customer feedback analysis, transparent complaint, resolution reporting, and employee training programs that met federal minimum standards for cultural competency and bias prevention. Dr. Sarah Kim had leveraged her inadvertent civil rights fame into 35,000 Feet Racism in the Skies, a documentary film that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary and generated over $50 million in proceeds donated to civil rights organizations and scholarships for underrepresented minorities pursuing aviation careers. The film featured comprehensive interviews with Marcus Rebecca and dozens of passengers who had experienced travel discrimination, but its most powerful segments focused on the systematic industry changes that had occurred following the Atlantic Airways incident, demonstrating how individual acts of discrimination could be transformed into catalysts for institutional reform when confronted with sufficient resources and strategic determination. Maya Patel's Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage had evolved into viral justice. How Social Media Transforms Corporate Accountability, a best-selling book that examined technology's role in amplifying discrimination complaints, forcing immediate corporate responses, and creating accountability mechanisms that previous generations of civil rights activists could never have accessed. Her analysis showed that the Atlantic Airways incident represented a fundamental shift in corporate accountability dynamics, where customer service failures could be documented, distributed globally, and transformed into financial consequences within hours rather than years of legal proceedings. Companies could no longer rely on discrimination remaining private complaints being resolved quietly through internal channels, or victims lacking resources to pursue systematic justice. The Champagne incident marked the moment when corporate discrimination met digital accountability, her award-winning book concluded. When systematic bias encounters adversaries with quantum computing resources, global media platforms, and unlimited strategic patience, traditional assumptions about hidden discrimination and minimal consequences become not just obsolete, but lethally expensive for companies that refuse to change. Elena Vasquez had continued her investigation into airline discrimination patterns, uncovering similar systematic bias at carriers worldwide. Her ongoing Wall Street Journal coverage had triggered regulatory investigations in 18 countries, resulted in executive resignations at 12 airlines, and led to policy changes affecting over 400 million passengers annually across global aviation networks. The Global Aviation Discrimination Database, funded by Nexus Technologies and managed by the International Civil Rights Coalition, had documented over 23,000 discrimination incidents across 340 airlines worldwide, providing transparency, accountability, and evidence for regulatory agencies and civil rights organizations working to eliminate systematic bias in international travel. Rebecca Morrison had become an unlikely but powerful advocate for corporate transformation and personal redemption through systematic education rather than permanent exclusion. Her speaking engagements at business conferences, university campuses, and civil rights organizations drew large audiences interested in understanding how unconscious bias operated in professional settings and could be addressed through comprehensive training rather than punitive responses alone. I spent 28 years believing I provided excellent customer service while unconsciously discriminating against passengers who didn't fit my assumptions about premium cabin demographics. She told audiences with the authenticity that came from genuine transformation rather than public relations coaching. The champagne incident forced me to confront biases I didn't know I possessed, creating opportunities for education and systematic growth rather than simply punishment and permanent exile. Her work with Meridian Airlines had developed training programs that were being implemented by service companies across multiple industries, from luxury hotels to high-end retail establishments. The Morrison method emphasized personal accountability, systematic prevention and redemption possibilities through comprehensive education rather than permanent exclusion for discrimination, perpetrators who demonstrated genuine commitment to change. The Aviation Industry Awards ceremony at Manhattan's Waldorf Astoria typically celebrated operational efficiency, route expansion, and financial performance metrics that demonstrated technical competency rather than social impact. But the 2026 ceremony would be remembered for unprecedented recognition. Meridian Airlines winning Carrier of the Year based primarily on human dignity and social justice commitment, rather than traditional operational metrics alone. Meridian Airlines had been selected for the industry's highest honor, after just 30 months of operation recognition that corporate culture could be as important as profit margins in defining sustainable excellence. The award citation specifically mentioned 0 discrimination incidents across over 200,000 flights, industry-leading customer satisfaction scores that remained consistent across all demographic categories, and innovative approaches to employee training and development that were being studied and replicated across multiple industries. Marcus stood at the podium accepting the award on behalf of 22,000 employees who had transformed a failed airline into an industry leader through principled commitment to human dignity rather than profit maximization alone, proving that ethical business practices and financial success were mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. This award belongs to every employee who chose to embrace systematic change rather than defending comfortable status quo, he said, addressing an audience that included airline executives, aviation regulators, civil rights leaders, and business school professors studying the transformation. It belongs to passengers who demanded better treatment and held companies accountable for discriminatory behavior through documentation, social media, amplification, and sustained economic pressure. And it belongs to individuals like Rebecca Morrison, who chose education and personal growth over defensiveness and denial when confronted with the reality of their unconscious biases. Rebecca sat at Meridian's table, still somewhat uncomfortable with public recognition, but understanding that her transformation had become a symbol of corporate America's redemption possibilities, when companies committed resources to systematic culture change, rather than crisis management and public relations damage control. Her journey from discrimination perpetrator to leading bias prevention advocate had inspired companies worldwide to view employee misconduct as education opportunities rather than simply grounds for termination and permanent exclusion. The audience rose in sustained standing ovation as Marcus concluded his remarks. But the moment that would be most remembered and analyzed in business schools for decades came during the post-ceremony reception. Flight attendant Keiko Tanaka approached Marcus with a champagne flute, the same routine customer service interaction that had triggered Atlantic Airways' destruction and Meridian Airlines' creation from systematic corporate transformation principles. "Dr. Chen-Williams," she said with genuine warmth, that reflected months of comprehensive training rather than scripted performance. "Would you like champagne to celebrate tonight's historic achievement?" "I would be deeply honored," Marcus replied, accepting the glass with a smile that reflected not triumph over defeated enemies, but satisfaction at transformation achieved through sustained commitment to principles that prioritized human dignity alongside business success. Sarah Kim Maya Patel and dozens of other witnesses to the original champagne incident attended the ceremony, creating a full-circle moment that demonstrated how individual acts of discrimination could be transformed into systematic change when confronted with courage, unlimited resources, and unwavering commitment to justice that extended beyond individual grievances to institutional reform. The champagne that had been denied in discrimination was now offered in celebration of transformation. The flight attendant who had committed the original discrimination had become the architect of prevention programs that were changing entire industries. The passenger who had been humiliated had become the leader of a comprehensive movement toward corporate accountability and human dignity as business imperatives. As the evening concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple champagne request and had evolved into comprehensive corporate culture transformation across American aviation and multiple other industries. The personal humiliation had been costly in emotional terms, but the systematic changes that resulted had created value extending far beyond any individual company's profit margins to encompass fundamental shifts in how human beings treated each other in commercial relationships. Rebecca Morrison serves as Meridian Airlines' Chief Diversity Officer and speaks regularly at corporate conferences about unconscious bias and systematic transformation. She completed a master's degree in social justice from Columbia University, maintains a widely read blog about corporate redemption, and has been featured in Harvard Business Review. She remains married to Robert for 32 years and is grandmother to 5. Dr. Sarah Kim continues practicing cardiovascular surgery and serves on Meridian's Passenger Advisory Board. Her documentary, 35,000 Feet, Racism in the Skies, is required viewing in corporate training programs globally and has been viewed over 95 million times across multiple platforms. She established the Kim Foundation for Transportation Equity, which has provided scholarships to over 2,000 underrepresented minorities pursuing aviation careers. Maya Patel won the Pulitzer Prize for her discrimination coverage and has authored 4 best-selling books about corporate accountability in the digital age. She serves as Meridian's independent ethics advisor and teaches investigative journalism at Columbia University. Her work contributed to federal legislation requiring quarterly discrimination, reporting across 12 industries. Harrison Blackwood lives in modest retirement in Sarasota, Florida, and volunteers with addiction recovery programs and corporate ethics workshops. His memoir, The Champagne Lesson: How Institutional Arrogance Destroyed My Company, became a best-selling business ethics textbook used in MBA programs worldwide and has generated over $3 million in proceeds donated to civil rights organizations. Elena Vasquez continues investigating corporate discrimination for the Wall Street Journal and serves on the Global Aviation Discrimination Database Board of Directors. Her ongoing work has contributed to federal legislation requiring comprehensive discrimination reporting across multiple industries and has been credited with preventing thousands of discrimination incidents through systematic transparency and accountability mechanisms. David Park remains Nexus Technologies CFO and Meridian Airlines board chairman. He completed an executive MBA focusing on social impact investing and speaks frequently about ethical business practices at conferences worldwide. His investment strategies have generated over $15 billion in returns, while maintaining strict social responsibility criteria. Dr. Aisha Johnson was named CEO of the Year by Fortune magazine and continues leading Meridian's expansion into international markets with the same commitment to human dignity that defined the company's domestic transformation. The airline now operates in 47 countries, with consistently superior customer satisfaction ratings across all cultural and demographic categories. Marcus Chen-Williams divides his time between running Nexus Technologies and serving as Meridian Airlines executive chairman. He has been invited to address the United Nations World Economic Forum, Harvard Business School, and over 200 corporate conferences about transforming systematic discrimination through accountability and sustained investment in culture change rather than public relations management. His daughter Emma graduated from Stanford with highest honors and now works as a social impact investment analyst, specializing in companies that demonstrate measurable progress towards systematic equality and human dignity as business strategy rather than corporate social responsibility add-ons. Meridian Airlines operates 750 flights daily to 165 destinations worldwide, maintains 98.4% customer satisfaction ratings that remain consistent across all demographic categories, and has never had a substantiated discrimination complaint in 4 years of operation, encompassing over 400,000 flights. The company's systematic success has inspired similar transformations across multiple industries, proving that ethical business practices and sustained financial success are not merely compatible, but create competitive advantages that discrimination-tolerant companies cannot replicate. The champagne incident that began as personal humiliation became a catalyst for systematic change, demonstrating that individual acts of courage, supported by sufficient resources and unwavering commitment to justice, can transform entire industries and create permanent improvements in how human beings are treated in commercial relationships across global economic systems. In first-class cabins worldwide, passengers of all backgrounds now receive champagne service without question qualification or discrimination of any kind. The transformation represents Marcus Chen-Williams's lasting legacy proof that human dignity is not just a moral requirement, but a business imperative that creates sustainable value for companies courageous enough to embrace systematic change rather than crisis management as their approach to corporate culture and customer service excellence. The revolution began with a single glass of champagne. It ended with the transformation of an entire industry's approach to human dignity, respect, and equality as foundational business principles rather than optional considerations that could be abandoned when convenient or profitable. If this story of transformation and justice resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who believe that dignity and respect should be universal values in business and life. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of how individual courage can create systematic change that benefits everyone. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we upload new content about corporate accountability, social justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people who need to hear them. Together, we can continue building a world where discrimination has consequences and human dignity is treated as the business imperative it should always have been. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single person refusing to accept that things can't be different.